Now he's gone and joined that stupid club. I told him not to join that stupid club. When Brian Jones, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison all died at the age of 27, it did raise some comment among music critics and fans. But according to biographer Charles R. Cross, it wasn't until Kurt Cobain took his own life in 1994 that the idea of the 27 Club arrived in the popular zeitgeist. In this video, we reveal 24 musical artists that died tragically at the young age of 27, and we tell the stories of their deaths. Why do you think so many artists die at 27? Leave a comment below and let us know what you think. And if you like the video, please click like and subscribe. It's free and it's a huge help to the channel. Louis Chauvin was an American ragtime pianist and composer. About 5 feet 5 and never over 145 pounds, he looked delicate with his fine features and long, tapering fingers, but he was wild and strong. He never gambled, but he stayed up and drank and made lots of love. He loved women, and he treated them like dirt. He always had 2 or 3. He loved whiskey too, but he only seemed to be living when he was at the piano. It's authentic, I guess, that he smoked opium in the last. Chauvin's wild lifestyle led to him contracting syphilis. He died of complications from the disease on March 26, 1908. Robert Johnson was an American blues musician and songwriter. His landmark recordings in 1936 and 1937 display a stunning combination of singing, guitar playing, and songwriting that has influenced generations of musicians. Robert's recording career spanned only 7 short months, but he's recognized as the king of the Delta blues style. Johnson is sometimes called the first rock star and was unquestionably one of the most influential musicians of the 20th century, though he had little commercial success or public recognition in his lifetime to show for it. Robert Johnson died on August 16, 1938 in Greenwood, Mississippi. It's likely he had congenital syphilis, and this might have been a contributing factor to his death. We also know that he died after 2 days of severe abdominal pain, vomiting, and bleeding from the mouth. Johnson's death certificate states that he died of unknown causes. However, as the blues player's legend and influence grew after his death, stories about his death evolved. Shortly before he died, Johnson had been playing for a few weeks at a country dance in Mississippi. One story claims Johnson was murdered by the jealous husband of a woman he'd flirted with. According to blues musician Sonny Boy Williamson, Johnson had been flirting with a married woman at the dance. The woman gave him a bottle of whiskey, poisoned by her husband. Johnson took the bottle, but Williamson says he knocked it out of Robert's hand, telling him to never drink from a bottle that he had not personally seen opened. Johnson replied, "Don't ever knock a bottle out of my hand." Soon after, Johnson was offered another bottle, and this time he accepted it. The following evening, Robert became increasingly ill, and finally he had to be helped back to his room in the early morning hours. Over the next 3 days, his condition and his pain steadily worsened. According to witnesses, he died in a convulsive state of severe pain. He was 27 years old. Nat Jaffe was a swing jazz pianist who trained classically in Berlin, Germany on his instrument. When he returned to the U.S., he was a prolific player in the jazz scene, recording and playing with such giants as Billie Holiday, Louis Armstrong, Jack Teagarden, and Sarah Vaughan, and leading his own trio on 4 recordings. Jaffe's success was brought to an early end by health problems. In 1945, he died from complications from high blood pressure at the young age of 27. Gospel-trained singer Rudy Lewis sang lead vocals for the Drifters starting in 1960, stepping in when Benny King departed. Lewis sang on a string of massive hits which are still well-known classics today. Please Stay, Some Kind of Wonderful, Up on the Roof, and On Broadway. May 21st, 1964, the Drifters were set to record Under the Boardwalk, written for Lewis to sing. Rudy didn't show up for the sessions, and later was found dead in his Harlem hotel room, where he had died the previous evening. Former lead vocalist Johnny Moore was brought back to perform lead vocals for the recording. The next day, the Drifters recorded I Don't Want to Go On Without You in tribute to Rudy Lewis. An autopsy was not performed, but Rudy Lewis's death was ruled a likely drug overdose. Founding member of the Rolling Stones, Brian Jones, was instrumental to early success of the Stones, pushing the band into gigs at clubs. He was a talented multi-instrumentalist and made unique contributions to the sound of the group on albums like Aftermath, Between the Buttons, and Their Satanic Majesty's Request. Issues with mental health, drugs, and the police, and conflict with his bandmates plagued Jones in the last few years of his life. By the time of the 1968 Beggar's Banquet album sessions, Jones' contributions to the record were minimal. His last appearance as a Stone was at the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. The film's worth watching, both for some great performances and also for how clearly zonked out everyone is. Brian Jones' last contributions to a record were to Let It Bleed. He played percussion on Midnight Rambler and auto harp on You Got the Silver. When the Stones went on tour and Brian Jones couldn't travel due to drug convictions, the band fired him and hired Mick Taylor as second guitarist. Brian Jones retreated to his home at Cotchford Farm, the former residence of Winnie the Pooh author A.A. Milne. A few weeks later, at around midnight on July 2nd, 1969, Jones was discovered motionless at the bottom of his swimming pool. He was dead at the age of 27. In 2002, Rolling Stones bassist Bill Wyman said, "As the years go by, I become even more convinced that he's entitled to a free pardon. Brian Jones is a legend, and his legacy is there for all to hear. While the Rolling Stones damaged all of us in some way, Brian was the only one who died." Alan Blind Owl Wilson was the co-founder, leader, co-lead singer, and primary composer of Canned Heat. The band's known for performing their hit Goin' Up the Country on the Woodstock soundtrack. Blind Owl is the classic falsetto voice you hear singing that song, a huge moment in rock history. He was a student of the blues, and he later became friends with and collaborated with legends like Son House and John Lee Hooker. Canned Heat's collaboration album with John Lee Hooker, titled Hooker and Heat, was John Lee Hooker's first record to make the charts. It would also be Blind Owl's final recording. Alan Blind Owl Wilson was a devoted ecologist who was almost obsessed with being outdoors as much as possible. So much so that it sometimes made it difficult for him to travel with the band. So when he missed a flight to a show, it didn't really raise any alarm bells. But he was later found dead in his backyard, in peaceful repose as if he died in his sleep, tucked into a sleeping bag, flat on his back, with hands folded on his chest. An autopsy identified his manner and cause of death as accidental acute barbiturate intoxication. Jimi Hendrix is widely regarded as one of the greatest and most influential electric guitarists in the history of popular music. His mind-blowing instrumental manipulations changed popular music. Hendrix started playing at the age of 15 and played with the Isley Brothers and Little Richard. In '66, at the age of 24, Hendrix moved to England after bassist Chas Chandler of the Animals became his manager. Within a few months, Hendrix had earned 3 top 10 UK hits with the Jimi Hendrix Experience: Hey Joe, Purple Haze, and The Wind Cries Mary. Hendrix achieved fame in the U.S. after his performance at Monterey Pop Festival in '67, and in 1968, his third and final studio album, Electric Ladyland, reached #1 in the United States. Like many of his contemporaries, Hendrix did copious amounts of drugs and enjoyed drinking as well. Jimi spent his final hours with his girlfriend, Monica Danneman, at her apartment in London's Samarkand Hotel. Food, wine, and conversation until dawn were paired with 9 of his girlfriend's Vesperax tablets. That's 18 times the recommended dose of the sleeping pill. They went to bed at 7 a.m. When Danneman awoke at 11 a.m., she could not wake Jimi. He was pronounced dead at the hospital at the age of 27. Singer-songwriter Janis Joplin had an electric presence on stage and a uniquely gritty vocal presence with intense emotion and power. She was one of the hugest rock stars of the 1960s, both with her bands and as a solo act, performing at both Woodstock and Monterey Pop Music Festivals. She released 3 albums, 2 with Big Brother and the Holding Company, and 1 solo album. Janis led a rollicking, partying lifestyle with lots of drugs and heavy drinking. Joplin died of a heroin overdose in 1970 at the age of 27. Her second album, Pearl, was released in January of 1971, just over 3 months after her death. It reached #1 on the Billboard charts. The controversial singer for The Doors, Jim Morrison, had a singular vocal style and a distinctive stage presence. He presented himself as a young poet, railing against the world enshrouded in darkness and mystery. Jim opened Huxley's doors of perception, often with psychoactive methods. In the decades since his death, Jim Morrison has become an iconic image of the rock and roll frontman. By the time of his death, Jim was heavily dependent on alcohol, and this had a bad impact on his performances, relationships, and his life. He died unexpectedly in his Paris apartment in July of 1971, after the Doors finished recording their masterpiece, L.A. Woman album. He was found in the bath by his girlfriend, Pamela Corson, and his cause of death was determined to be heart failure. There was no autopsy performed, so Morrison's cause of death is still a subject of debate. For our video about Jim Morrison's final show, click the link above my head. Ron Pigpen McKernan was a founding member of the Grateful Dead, playing with the band from 1965 to 1972. He started the Dead, playing folk and jug music with Jerry Garcia in San Francisco. Pigpen was the Dead's original frontman, but he eventually became the keyboard player and then percussionist, harmonica player, and backup vocalist as the band evolved over time, and he still did vocals on some songs live. Unlike his bandmates, Pigpen shunned psychedelic drugs. He preferred alcohol. Drinking had such a severely negative impact on his health that Pigpen was advised by doctors in 1971 to completely retire from touring indefinitely. He stopped for a while, but eventually this proved too much to ask, and he returned to the road. McKernan rejoined the Dead in December of 1971, but was forced to stop again in June of 72, about 6 months later. Pigpen was found dead of a gastrointestinal hemorrhage on March 8, 1973. The original bassist for the Stooges, Dave Alexander, dropped out of high school in the first 45 minutes of his senior year on a bet. Later that year, Xander sold his motorcycle and went to England to find the Beatles and to see The Who. In 1967, Xander and his friends, the Ashton brothers, Ron and Scott, met Iggy Pop, and soon the four formed the band The Stooges. Even though Xander was a beginner on the bass, he picked it up quickly and had a hand in writing the songs for the Stooges' first two albums, 1969's The Stooges and 1970's Funhouse. In August 1970, the Stooges had a gig at Goose Lake International Music Festival. Alexander got way too drunk before the show, couldn't play, and subsequently was fired from the band. Dave Alexander didn't continue playing in bands. He had some investments which allowed him to make ends meet. In 1975, he was admitted to the hospital in Ann Arbor for pancreatitis. Alexander died of pulmonary edema, which was linked to his alcoholism. He was 27. Lead vocalist and composer for the 1970s band Badfinger, Pete Ham helped Harry Nilsson write the massive hit Without You, which became a standard. His band, the Ivies, was signed to Apple Records at the approval of all four Beatles, and later changed the band name to Badfinger. Financial conflicts with the band's manager led to said manager reportedly absconding with Ham's earnings. Pete Ham had recently purchased a new home, and his girlfriend and he were expecting their first child, and now he was destitute. After a night of heavy drinking, Ham hanged himself in his garage. He left a note blaming his death on his manager. He was 27 years old. Badfinger dissolved, and at that time, Apple Records deleted all their records from its catalog. Gary Thain played bass with Keef Hartley Band, appearing at Woodstock with the group. He later joined the band Uriah Heep. Thain was often praised for his innovative and progressive bass lines. In '74, during his last tour of the U.S. with Uriah Heep, Thain suffered a serious electric shock at the Moody Coliseum in Dallas, Texas. Subsequently unable to play due to his drug addiction, Thain was fired from the band. In December of 1975, he died at his home in London of respiratory complications due to a heroin overdose. Chris Bell was a member of the band Big Star with Alex Chilton, having a major hand in the band's first record, #1 record. While he was not that well known in his day, Bell's solo work and his album with Big Star would prove to be hugely influential to alternative rock bands like R.E.M., The Replacements, The Pixies, Pete Yorn, Wilco, and Afghan Whigs, among many others. On December 27, 1978, Chris Bell was on his way home from a band rehearsal. He lost control of his Triumph sports car, hit a wooden light pole on the side of the road. The pole fell down and killed him instantly. He was 27. D. Boon was the guitarist, singer, and songwriter of the punk band Minutemen. Boon formed Minutemen in 1980 with bassist Mike Watt and drummer George Hurley. The band's album, Double Nickels on the Dime, is considered a punk classic. At the band's peak, Boon was tragically killed while riding in a van with his girlfriend in 1985. He was sick and lying down without a seatbelt. One of the axles broke, running the van off the road, and Boon was thrown from the vehicle and instantly died from a broken neck. He was 27. Pete DeFreitas was drummer for the English band Echo and the Bunnymen on their first 5 albums. Pete was hired on in 1979 to replace a drum machine. His style was influenced by Budgie of Susie and the Banshees. He stuck to the toms for those tribal beats. In 1989, Pete DeFreitas was on his way to Liverpool from London on his motorcycle when he collided with another vehicle. The accident killed him instantly. He was 27. Zapata was lead singer for the Seattle punk band the Gits. After gaining praise in the emerging grunge scene, Zapata was brutally murdered in 1993 while on her way home from a show at the age of 27. She was identified after the medical examiner recognized her. He was a fan of the Gits and he'd been to their concerts. The crime went unsolved for a decade before her killer was finally arrested in 2003 due to advances in DNA technology. Kurt Cobain was the co-founder, lead vocalist, guitarist, and primary songwriter of the rock band Nirvana. Cobain's emotionally racked compositions and anti-establishment views had a real impact on mainstream rock music. Cobain is still widely recognized as one of the most influential rock musicians ever. Cobain struggled with addiction and mental health problems increasingly towards the end of his life. Despite his friends and family's attempts to intervene, Kurt resisted. On April 7, 1994, Nirvana withdrew from the Lollapalooza festival amid rumors of the band breaking up. On April 8, 1994, Kurt Cobain's body was discovered at his house by an electrician who was there to install a security system. A suicide note was found. It stated that Cobain had not felt the excitement of listening to as well as creating music, along with really writing, for many years now. The coroner's report estimated Cobain died on April 5, 1994. After Cobain's death, his mother was quoted as saying, "Now he's gone and joined that stupid club. I told him not to join that stupid club." Kristen Pfaff was the bassist for alternative rock band Hole from 1993 to 94, appearing on their Live Through This album. She also played bass with the band Janitor Joe. A close friend of Courtney Love and Kurt Cobain, Kristen was deeply impacted by Kurt's suicide. And like many in that circle, Kristen used heroin. 2 months after Kurt Cobain's death, Kristen was found dead in her Seattle apartment. Her death was attributed to acute opiate intoxication. Her mother refuses to accept the official explanation behind her daughter's death. Richie Edwards, stage name Richie Manic, was guitarist and lyricist for the Welsh band Manic Street Preachers. He really wrote lyrics primarily and contributed to design for the band. His guitar playing was rudimentary at best, and he pretended to play at early shows. He barely played on their recordings, but 80% of the band's lyrics were his. In February of 1995, Richie accumulated money, left gifts for some friends, and apparently vanished. His disappearance was never really properly resolved, and he's presumed dead. Randy Walker was a Queens, New York rapper by the stage name Stretch. Stretch's short, notable career impacted songs and albums that would become massive hits and cultural milestones. This included founding the group Live Squad on Tommy Boy Records, producing records for and rapping with Tupac, Nas, Digital Underground, and others. He appeared in the film Juice with Tupac and was heavily involved in producing and rapping on much of Tupac's work up until the 1994 attempt on Shakur's life. The two had been very close, but Tupac began to suspect that Stretch was involved in the shooting, and he said as much to The Source magazine in 1996. Stretch, of course, denied it, but their friendship had soured. On November 30th, 1995, exactly 1 year after the first attempt on Tupac's life, Stretch was in the studio working with Nas on his second album, It Was Written. After the recording session, Stretch was on his way to a Biggie Smalls event when a group of men in a black car pulled up beside Stretch's minivan. They began shooting at him and a car chase through the city ensued. Just after midnight, Stretch crashed at 112th Avenue and 209th Street, dead with 4 bullets in his back. He was 27 years old. Talik Raymond Rogers, stage name Freaky Ta, was a member of the Queens, New York rap group The Lost Boys. When the Lost Boys contributed a single to the Don't Be a Menace to South Central While Drinking Your Juice in the Hood soundtrack, the song blew up and broke into the top 40 of the Hot 100 chart. Their follow-up debut full-length album, Legal Drug Money, had 5 hits and went gold. Freaky Ta was unfortunately murdered tragically in a case of mistaken identity. He was shot while leaving a hotel in New York with some friends. American vocalist and sound artist Jeremy Ward was loosely associated with the band At the Drive-In. After that band split in 2001, members Cedric Bixler-Zavala and Omar Rodriguez Lopez invited Ward to contribute vocals and sounds to their new band, the Mars Volta. Ward contributed to that first record and was essential to the sound, but sadly, weeks before the album dropped, Jeremy Michael Ward died of an apparent heroin overdose. His music lives on as the Mars Volta continually sample his experimental audio recordings. Amy Jade Winehouse was an English singer and songwriter. She was known for her incredible vocals and her mix of musical genres, including soul, R&B, and jazz. Winehouse's bodyguard said that he had arrived at her residence 3 days before her death and felt she'd been somewhat intoxicated. He observed moderate drinking over the next few days and said she was laughing, listening to music, and watching TV at 2 a.m. the day of her death. At 10 a.m. on July 23, 2011, her bodyguard saw her laying on her bed and tried to rouse her. This didn't raise a lot of suspicion because she usually slept late after a night out. He checked again at 3 p.m. and she was laying in the same position. So he did a further check and concluded she wasn't breathing and she had no pulse. So he called 911. 2 ambulances reached Winehouse's home and she was pronounced dead at the scene. Will there be lots of naked ladies? And will there be taking drugs and drinking lots of beer and fooling around in the mud? Because rain was forecast, and he said, oh yeah. And I said, right, well then I don't want to go, because I don't like hippies, and I'm usually rather put off by naked ladies unless the time is right.